Hello and welcome to Devereux's Fireside Chats with Carl Clark. My name is Amy Ashman. I'm Devereux's National Director of Communications. April is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. In this special edition of our Fireside Chats, we're going to speak with two of Devereux's national trustees who serve on the Family Advisory Board. I want to welcome the following guests to today's session. Carl Clark, our President and CEO. James Schwab, former chair of the Media and Entertainment Group at Paul Weiss and former president at Vice Media. James has been a national trustee since 2001 and serves as co-chair of Devereux's Family Advisory Board. James's son, Jackson, lives in a community home near our Devereux, New York campus. I'd also like to welcome Jane Taylor, a visual artist and painter who has served as a national trustee since 2017. She is also a co-chair of our Family Advisory Board. Jane's brother, John, resided at our Pennsylvania Adult Services Center, where he thrived and flourished on our campus until he passed away in 2010. I'd like to welcome everyone.
Thanks.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Again, thank you all for your time today. James and Jane, we are really excited to learn more about you, your family, your role on Devereux's Family Advisory Board, but most importantly, your experiences as Devereux family members, because everything we do must align with the Devereux Family Standard, which is really the lens through which we carefully review all of our programs and services to make sure they're operating at the highest possible levels. This high standard really drives us to consider everything we do from a family's perspective and ensures our staff feel comfortable placing our own loved ones in Devereux's care. So let's get started. James, my first question is for you. Would you please share some information about your son, Jackson, and how you found Devereux?
Well, Jackson is now 30 years old, which is amazing. And as we say that, we feel like we're more fortunate than some, less fortunate than others. Jackson has some speech and language skills, but I think most of all he's pretty well adjusted. He seems he's pretty happy with life, and so we're really thankful for everything that we've able to achieve with Devereux. We first came to Devereux. Jackson was diagnosed in the early 1990s. And back then there were not a lot of programs for individuals with autism, certainly not anything focused specifically on autism. Was mostly general special education in school districts. And so we realized when he was diagnosed at a young age that we needed to work on the challenges of that moment. And we had hot and cold running therapy in our basement that my wife was overseeing. And at the same time, we had a plan for the future, and that meant looking to create a school that was more focused on autism. There were a bunch of other families in Westchester County, New York, similarly feeling the same way in terms of the need that was not met. And so we got together as a group, and we started, we knew exactly the kinds of educational program we wanted for our children, so higher intensity, higher staff ratios, ABA. And we interviewed a number of different social service agencies, and Devereux was one of them, to partner with, because we knew what we wanted. We didn't know how to run a school. We didn't want to run a school, but we needed a partner who believed in the same things that we did. And Devereux really distinguished itself from all the other organizations. As a total coincidence, a mentor of mine happened to be vice chair of the Devereux board, and he's was Jane's father as well. So we have that family connection. But that really wasn't how we got to Devereux. It really was Devereux distinguishing itself in terms of the quality of care, the focus, and the interest in really helping parents do something somewhat unique at that time and trying to build a school from scratch. We started with 6 kids, and now that school has, well over 50, and lots of the young men and women like my son are now in Devereux adult programs or other adult programs. So it's been a tremendous success for the community as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, James. And Jane, would you please share some background on your brother John and his journey with Devereux?
Sure. Well, I can certainly speak to Devereux's continuum of care. John I don't know when he was diagnosed. He and I are only a year apart, and I don't remember any of that. But I'm pretty sure he went to live at Devereux in 1964. We also were in the New York suburban area, and if there was nothing in the 1990s, you can imagine what was there in the 1960s. I remember clearly one day, I was with her picking John up at yet another private school that we tried, and just sensing how distraught she was. And I don't know what happened, but I can only imagine that school too had said, we just can't provide the education your son needs. And so my parents found Devereux. Devereux, when I think of it, the face of it has changed very much over the years as John's needs changed, and as I grew up and came to understand what Devereux was more and more. In the early days, I thought of it as a place where John could go to school and learn and have friends. Then later, it became a place where he could work and develop skills and have some degree of self-sufficiency. And then later on, it became a place that cared for him with his intense medical needs. All along, it was a place that felt supportive and safe for John. It was sometimes very difficult when he was at home, and it was really a relief to know that Devereux was there, a phone call away if things got out of hand. And interestingly enough, it was very often John who wanted to make that phone call. He knew he needed something other than what the family was providing, and things would just come down a notch at that point. So it really was a lifesaver for us, and certainly for John.
It's really the continuum of care point is really so important. Jackson had a shadow support him when he was included in public school at a young age. He had day school services. He had campus-based education services. He lived in a group home, and he's in a group home as well today, and as well as adult day hab, supported employment and recreation. So that was a key part in our in this group of families' decision to partner with Devereux as well, was that broad continuum of service.
Well, thank you both for sharing your initial journey with Devereux. Really, for all those watching, unless you have been through this as a parent or family member, it is really impossible to imagine placing your child or loved one in the care of others. James, you shared your journey in terms of how you found Devereux, but what was that experience like when you brought Jackson to us to leave him in our care? What was that experience like, and how did the influence make you feel that day?
It's hard to put into words exactly. It was kind of devastating and gut wrenching, but at the same time, you know that you feel you're doing the right thing for your child and your family, no matter how much we had prepared for it. We tried a week of summer camp here and there, or 2 weeks, other things to kind of start getting us and him, prepared. But the enormity of that moment of kind of permanent transition was really hard to describe. And it's a very personal decision. I think, different families may have, different choices that they make that's right for them. So there's no one size fits all here. I think the families and staff and anybody else who's a Devereux supporter listening to this should really understand it is a very personal decision. For us, there were a number of reasons why, to this day, we really feel strongly that it was right for our family and for Jackson. The idea that one day, we're fortunate he could stay at home with us, for years and years, but one day we're not going to be here. And the idea that he would go through his, transition as a 50 or 60-year-old and with both parents gone was something that it was hard for us to wrap our arms around. Second, I think we wanted to just make sure that the responsibility of planning for Jackson's life was really on our shoulders and not on his siblings. They're amazing advocates and supporters, like Jane was for her brother, and still is to this day. But that was really something we wanted them to not have to worry about. And they have their own lives that they need to build. And I know Jackson will be part of their lives, but they didn't need to have to worry about, as much as they might otherwise if we hadn't planned ahead. And last for him, single young men often, live in an apartment together or live in a house together. And, so he's got 3 other housemates and they've got a relationship. It's, a friendship, maybe not the way the rest of us have friendships, but there is something there that's important and a connection, and it's personal and meaningful. And so we felt like he should have that experience. And I think it really has been good for him.
I love hearing these stories.
Amy, I'd love to just jump in there and underscore something that James said. For me as a sibling and for my sister, it was a great relief knowing that Devereux was there. I mean, that I just can't imagine what that would have been like watching my parents age if there hadn't been something underneath us holding us up. So it was very important that Devereux be there.
Thank you for that, Jane. And James, thank you for sharing your story. Jane, just to kind of talk a little bit more about the sibling factor. John was a year younger than you. It must have been, going back to, the transition to longer term care. It must have been really hard to see John move away. Do you recall what that was like and how you felt, and how did you stay connected over the years?
Well, I definitely recall it was really hard and really confusing. My sister and I certainly understood that John was special, and we were reminded that often, and it was explained to us that he was special and needed a special kind of education, and that they wanted the best place for each one of us, and the best place for John was not going to be living with us. But he also started by going to summer camp, and for me, the idea of summer camp was a nightmare. Not for him, for me. I couldn't even imagine myself going. So to imagine my baby brother going, it was kind of appalling. And we all went up to Maine, and we have pictures. It coincided with his birthday, so we had a birthday party there and lots of pictures, and they are still really painful for both Holly and me to look at. It was hard. I remember the day we took him to Devereux, to the Devereux campus. And, the only thing I remember from that day is getting into the car to leave, and all of us crying, all of us, Mom and Dad, Johnny. And I looked at him, and he was standing there in the driveway next to his house mother, and she had his arm around him. And, I looked, and, there was a house, I thought, okay, maybe that can be a home. And there's a woman there who clearly cares. Maybe she can kind of be a mom. I mean, it's all kind of vague, trying to remember way back then, and just thinking, well, maybe it's going to be okay. And of course, as time went on, it became more and more okay. We stayed connected with frequent phone calls, lots of weekends down there, and long home visits. And, in the beginning, every time he came home and went back, it was hard all over again. But that became easier and easier. And as time went on, by the end, he'd be ready to go back, a place where expectations were more in line with his abilities, where he had real friends. I mean, the kids in the neighborhood could be brutal. And to be away from that and with peers was really great. I think I pulled away as I went off to college. I lived abroad for a while, got married, had my own kids and babies. But as my kids got older, I started, family just becomes more important anyway, but I started realizing how much they needed a relationship with him, and reconnected things in a pretty strong way. And being an uncle was one of the most important things in John's life. I remember my husband and I divorced, and the only thing John wanted to know was, would he still be an uncle? That was the most important thing. And of course. So yeah, we stayed connected all the way through. Devereux just became a part of the mix, an extension of the family. And if anything, facilitated our ability to be connected.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jane. Wow. I want to ask both of you, James and Jane, when you really think about your loved one's journey with Devereux, what are the areas of care or support that exceeded your needs or expectations? And I'm going to start with Jane.
I don't even have to think about that. It's the staff. I can't say enough of them. I mean, it's a hard job, and what became very clear was the depth, not just the depth of caring and the quality of care, but the depth of knowing who John was. At one point, he was having terrible stomach pains, and they took him to the emergency room and they checked him out, and they said, "There's nothing wrong, gas, indigestion, who knows," and sent him back. And the nurse at Ferdinand said, "No." He came back and she said, "No, I know, John, this is not something simple like a gas pain. There is something wrong. Take him back to the emergency room and tell them I said there's something wrong." And it was a different crew that came in and examined him. And sure enough, he had a perforated intestine. And he very well could have died had he not been taken back to the emergency room. And that was purely a case of somebody really knowing him and his response to pain, which was not typical. He had an incredibly high threshold. When he did pass away, the member of the staff, whose name I can't recall, who brought him, when we all arrived, Johnny was on life support. And, I went over and said, "Take a break. You've been here a while." And he wouldn't leave the room. As long as John was on life support, he insisted on staying. And when John passed away, we were all grief-stricken. And I looked at him and went over and sat down next to him and put my arm around him. I felt that I needed to give him some support. They're amazing. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. James, how about you? Where do you feel Devereux exceeds your expectations or your needs?
Well, as always, Jane's a tough act to follow. And thanks for sharing those stories, Jane. It's the people, it's the staff, without doubt. As parents, family members, we do what we have to. We do what we do because we have to. Folks choose this field as a profession, right? They don't have to work in this field. They choose this field. So that's it's just remarkable. For somebody to love someone else's child that way that Jane was describing, these are angels, walking amongst us. And it's a hard job in many ways, but it's an impossible job, in the sense that, as a parent, I want, anybody who's caring for Jackson to be me, be my surrogate, treat him as the same way I would, have that level of care and attention and focused attention to detail, worry about what he eats and his hygiene and what he wears and what he does and how's he engaged during the day and active and entertained and it's hard. I understand, folks can't take the place of the family, but they try, right? And that's the most important thing, is having staff who really care and try. And sure, they can't be me, but maybe in some ways they'll be better than me in some things. And as you said early on, when we started, the Devereux family standard really is kind of the driving force behind all of that. And sometimes you can't really articulate it, and sometimes you see it when and you know it when you see it. And some of Jane's examples, and I have one where during COVID, it was a staff member who kind of pulled us aside and said, "I just want you all to know that when Jackson and the boys are going to day hab, There's a bunch of other, folks in Dahab who we don't, I don't know how their homes are run. They have other agencies, maybe are providing residential services, or maybe they're living at home. And so I know how this house is run and the level of safety and precaution. But I don't know about these others. So I do everything I can during the day, even if it may be, something that the Dahab might do differently, but I do everything I can to keep these guys together. And when they're traveling, I keep them in one van. And I make sure nobody else is going to come in this van if I don't know exactly how their home has been managed. And I don't let them go in a van with somebody else. And I really try to, focus on their safety. And it's like, well, I would do the same thing. That's the family standard. Nobody could have written that down and articulated it, right? So much of it is you know it when you see it. And that's just, these examples exist 100 times a day. And that's the beauty of having a staff who chose this profession and care and understand what the organization is trying to achieve, not just for my son or Jane's brother, but for everyone we serve.
James and Jane, these stories are the ones we live to hear. This is why we do what we do. And Carl, I just want to ask you, when you hear James and Jane's stories, which are incredibly inspirational, how does it make you feel?
Initially emotional, and then a lot of gratitude, because in both cases, we have individuals in James and Jane who can compartmentalize all those things they've went through that, we'd like to think that we've dealt with that and we've moved on, but every once in a while that comes up, and yet they are engaged members of a major organization as a governing trustee. And to be able to balance those two is a pretty awesome ability, I think. And it also changes the entire flavor of what we focus on as an organization. Previously, I worked for some organizations that all they talked about in board meetings were numbers. At Devereux, we're much more focused on quality of care, safety of the individual. What could we do to be better about that? How are we treating families, or how are we engaging families? All those kind of substantive, qualitative things that are incredibly important to what we do, and incredibly important to the people we serve, right?
Hey, Carl, folks watching this may or may not know, one of the really unique things about Devereux is it's not just me and Jane, who are family members on the board. Devereux, in its actual corporate bylaws, requires that a third of the national trustees be family members of individuals who are or were in our care. And I think that's just so unique, and we're so grateful to have that voice for the family members, and to have a staff and fellow trustees who listen and want to hear us out and try to continuously improve.
That's a great point, James. And that's one of the questions I was going to talk about. And I want to extend that to Jane. What does our bylaw about requiring 33% of our board members to also be family members, how does that make you feel? Why is that important to you as a national trustee?
Well, I think for the reasons Carl stated, that, it keeps the focus of the board where it should be. That obviously, if you're running an organization, there are numbers to deal with, but it keeps us aware that those numbers represent individuals and it's not just data.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. One of the things, and we talked about the successes where we are exceeding as an organization, but we always know there is more to be done. And so one of Devereux's core values is progress, finding ways to innovate, finding ways to advance our services to benefit the individuals in our care. James, would you please share any areas or opportunities where you feel Devereux could improve?
Sure. I think technology is something that, any business. But I think as we've seen, with the rise of telehealth during a pandemic, like it's who thought how quickly that would accelerate. But way beyond that, in terms of impact on quality and safety, technology, it can be hugely important. I think Devereux, given our geographic dispersion, given the nature of our services, we're increasingly over time, more and more of what we do is, in the community. It's not center-based, dozens or hundreds of group homes that we have now also create, a need to think differently about supervision, and quality and safety and monitoring all of that. And so I think technology is going to continue to play an increasingly important role. On the flip side, when you have that geographic dispersion, it's harder to create a cohesive culture. And again, I think that's another place. We've got in Jackson's group home, he's 50 or 60 miles from the main center campus and probably 10 or 15 miles from the next closest group home. So it's really that staff may only see each other. So the importance of video supervision and FaceTiming and these kinds of things, quite frankly, and Carl and senior leadership presence are so important to creating that culture and making sure that we've got that communication.
Great, thanks, James. And Jane, how about you? Where do you feel we could improve? Where are the opportunities for us?
Well, the obvious one for me is to expand the role of the sibling at Devereux. I think it's a relatively untapped resource. There are a lot of us out there, and siblings usually have the longest relationship with the person who needs services. And I think technology will help in opening up communication with the family. We're very excited about a family portal that is in the works to be open, which will be a place online where families can go and get information about treatment, about behavior, about what their loved one has had for breakfast and what kind of day he or she has had. I think it'll be a great resource in keeping families connected and involving siblings.
I think what's going to be so awesome about that project as well is, again, if you want the family standard, you need to hear from the families, and having that kind of, an app portal, really to allow the families to work so collaboratively with the staff to be able to problem solve things, but even just to, help the staff really understand and have, the almost like the manual for what is my son like and dislike, and what, might trigger certain behavior and all that stuff. And technology can really help us, deal with things in more real time, in a more immediate way, and hopefully achieve a better outcome for everybody involved.
I'd like to direct this final family member question to James. James, when you think of the future for Jackson, what are your hopes and dreams for him?
I don't think our hopes and dreams for Jackson would be different than any other parent's hopes and dreams for any of their kids. You want your children to be happy. You want them to have a full life. You want them to achieve their potential, whatever that potential may be. For other kids, maybe it's, finding love, someone to share their life with, maybe raising a family if that's what they, choose to do. In Jackson's case, it may not be some of those things, but, I know when he's happy, I know when he has connection with people, and when he has joy in his daily life and little things that, he gets pleasure from, and he has that. And we're confident that he'll continue to have that. We're really, it all comes back to the staff, right? And the system, the structure, and the people. And we've got, really great systems and processes and people at Devereux. And I'm confident that they'll provide him with just a great, loving, caring environment for many, many, many years to come. It won't be us. It won't be Kim and me, but it'll be Pretty darn close. And I think in some ways, the staff does some things even better than we do.
Wow. I just want to say to Jane and James, you shared a lot of personal information today and a lot of personal stories. And I'm so grateful to the two of you for being here today, sharing these stories with us and everyone who's watching this video. It really helps us better understand the family perspective. And we're also grateful that you're serving on Devereux's board and helping us make advances when it comes to the care and services we provide to the individuals we are privileged to serve every day. And so we appreciate your time, your support, and your candidness today. And to all those watching, thank you. And please stay tuned for our next episode of Carl's Fireside Chats.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Take care and be well, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.